Denise Carter remembered the exact moment she decided she would never let anyone make her feel small again. She was 9 years old, sitting in the back of fourth-grade classroom, and her teacher had just told her that girls like her should focus on practical jobs instead of dreaming too big. That memory stayed with her for 33 years. It pushed her through late nights of studying, through rejection letters, through doors that seemed permanently closed to women who looked like her dad now. At 42, Denise was standing outside the glass doors of Whitmore and Associates, one of the most respected consulting firms in Chicago. Her reflection stared back at her. A black woman in a navy blue suit, her hair pulled back neatly, her shoulders squared with quiet determination. Today was her first day as regional director. She was the first black woman to ever hold this position in the company's 58-year history. She had worked for this moment her entire adult life. Denise took a deep breath and pushed through the doors. The lobby was everything she expected. Marble floors, high ceilings, the smell of expensive coffee drifting from somewhere nearby. Young professionals in tailored clothes walked briskly past her, their eyes glued to their phones or focused straight ahead. Nobody stopped to look at her. Nobody knew yet that she was about to become one of the most important people in this building. She liked it that way. Denise had never been one for grand entrances. She preferred to let her work speak for itself. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt longer than it should have. Denise used the time to review her mental checklist. She had spent the past 3 weeks preparing for this role. She knew every major account by heart. She had memorized the quarterly projections, studied the team dynamics, and mapped out her vision for the department's future. If anyone thought she was going to walk in unprepared, they were in for a surprise. The doors opened, and Denise stepped onto the executive floor. A young woman at the reception desk looked up and smiled. Her name tag read Christina. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I'm Denise Carter, the new regional director." Christina's eyes widened slightly. Oh, yes. Of course. "Welcome, Miss Carter. Let me show you to your office." Denise noticed the brief hesitation, the flicker of surprise that crossed Christina's face. She had seen that look many times before. It was the look people gave when reality did not match their expectations. Denise did not take it personally. She had learned long ago that some people needed time to adjust their assumptions. Her office was spacious and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. A large mahogany desk sat in the center, and fresh flowers had been placed on the corner table. Someone had taken care to make the space welcoming. Denise set her bag down and looked out at the view. Chicago stretched before her like a promise. She had come so far from the little apartment in Detroit where she grew up sharing a bedroom with her 2 sisters. Her mother had worked double shifts as a nurse just to keep food on the table. Her father had left when Denise was 7, and she never saw him again. Everything she had accomplished on her own. She allowed herself one moment of pride. Just one. Then she turned away from the window and got to work. The executive team meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. Denise arrived at the conference room 5 minutes early, her portfolio tucked under her arm. The room was already half full. Men in expensive suits sat around the long oval table, chatting among themselves. A few women were scattered here and there, but Denise was the only black face in the room. She took a seat near the head of the table and began organizing her notes. One by one, the other executives filtered in. Some nodded at her politely. Others barely glanced in her direction. Denise kept her expression neutral and focused on the task ahead. Then he walked in. Denise noticed him immediately. A tall man in his early 50s with graying hair and a permanent scowl etched into his features. He moved with the confidence of someone who believed he owned every room he entered. His eyes scanned the table until they landed on Denise. Something flickered across his face. Annoyance, maybe. Or something worse. He took a seat at the far end of the table, directly across from her, and crossed his arms over his chest. Denise learned later that his name was Victor Brennan. He had been with Whitmore and Associates for over 20 years and had been the favorite candidate for the regional director position. When the company chose Denise instead, Victor had not taken it well. He believed the job was rightfully his. He believed Denise had stolen something that belonged to him, but Denise did not know any of this yet. All she knew was that this man was staring at her with open hostility, and she had a presentation to deliver. The CEO, a silver-haired man named Richard Whitmore III, called the meeting to order. He welcomed Denise warmly, praised her impressive background, and invited her to share her vision for the department. Denise stood up and walked to the front of the room. She connected her laptop to the projector and pulled up her presentation. She had practiced this a dozen times. She knew every word, every slide, every transition by heart. "Good morning, everyone," she began. "I want to start by saying how honored I am to be here. Whitmore and Associates has a reputation for excellence, and I intend to build on that foundation. Over the next quarter, my focus will be on 3 key areas: client retention, operational efficiency, and team development." She clicked to the next slide and continued speaking. The room was quiet, attentive. Denise could feel herself hitting her stride. This was what she was good at. This was where she belonged. Then Victor interrupted. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "I'm sorry, but I just want to make sure I understand something." Denise paused. "Of course." "What's your question?" Victor leaned back in his chair and smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "Are you sure you're in the right meeting?" "Because I was under the impression this was an executive session. The support staff usually meets on the second floor." The room went completely silent. Denise felt the words hit her like a physical blow. Her heart pounded in her chest. Heat rose to her cheeks. Every eye in the room was on her, waiting to see how she would react. She knew exactly what Victor was doing. He was testing her. He wanted to see if he could rattle her, break her confidence, make her doubt herself in front of everyone who mattered. He wanted her to stumble, to lose her composure, to prove that she did not belong. Denise thought about her mother working those double shifts. She thought about her 9-year-old self sitting in that classroom, being told to dream smaller. She thought about every obstacle she had overcome, every door she had pushed open. Every person who had underestimated her. She was not going to give Victor the satisfaction. Denise looked at him calmly, her expression betraying nothing. Then she turned back to her presentation and clicked to the next slide. "As I was saying," she continued, her voice steady and clear, "our client retention rate currently sits at 82%. My goal is to raise that to 90% within the next 12 months. Here's how we're going to do it." She did not acknowledge Victor's comment. She did not dignify it with a response. She simply kept going, as if he had not spoken at all. The message was clear. Denise Carter was not someone who could be easily dismissed. She was not someone who would crumble under pressure. She was here to do a job, and nothing was going to stop her. Victor's smile faded. His arms remained crossed, but something in his posture shifted. He had expected her to falter. She had not. After the meeting ended, several colleagues approached Denise to introduce themselves. A few mentioned how impressed they were with her presentation. Nobody mentioned what Victor had said. It was as if everyone had silently agreed to pretend it had not happened, but Denise knew better. This was only the beginning. Victor Brennan had drawn a line in the sand. He had made it clear that he would not accept her presence without a fight. What he did not realize was that Denise had been fighting her whole life, and she had never lost yet. The first week passed without major incident. Denise kept her head down and focused on learning the rhythm of the office. She memorized names, studied workflows, and made a point to have one-on-one conversations with every member of her team. She wanted them to know that she was approachable, that she valued their input, that she was not the kind of leader who hid behind closed doors. Most of her colleagues were welcoming. They seemed genuinely pleased to have fresh leadership. A few were cautious, watching her carefully before deciding whether to trust her. Denise understood this. Trust had to be earned, but Victor Brennan was a different story entirely. After that first meeting, Denise hoped that Victor would simply accept the situation and move on. Maybe he had been having a bad day. Maybe his comment was a one-time thing, a moment of frustration that would not repeat itself. She wanted to believe that they could find a way to work together professionally. Even if they would never be friends, she was wrong. It started small. Little things that could easily be dismissed as accidents or oversights. Denise would arrive at a meeting only to discover that she had never received the calendar invite. She would ask for project updates and learn that the emails had been sent to everyone except her. Reports that should have landed on her desk somehow ended up delayed or incomplete. At first, Denise gave Victor the benefit of the doubt. The office was busy. People made mistakes. She did not want to assume the worst about someone she barely knew, but the pattern became impossible to ignore. One Monday morning, Denise discovered that a major client meeting had been rescheduled without her knowledge. Victor had contacted the client directly and moved the appointment to a time when Denise was already committed to another obligation. When she confronted him about it, he simply shrugged. "I sent you an email," he said, not even bothering to look up from his computer. "Not my fault if you don't check your inbox." Denise checked. There was no email. She asked the IT department to verify, and they confirmed that no message had ever been sent to her address when she brought this to Victor's attention. He smiled, that same cold smile from the first meeting. "Must have been a glitch in the system," he said. "Technology, right? Can't trust it." Denise knew he was lying. She could see it in his eyes. But she also knew that she could not prove it. Not yet. She started keeping a journal. Every evening after work, Denise sat at her kitchen table and wrote down everything that had happened that day. She recorded dates, times, names of witnesses, and exact quotes whenever possible. She saved screenshots of emails she did receive and noted the ones she should have received but did not. She was building a case, piece by piece, though she was not sure yet what she would do with it. Her mother had always told her that the truth had a way of coming out eventually. You just had to be patient and prepared. The second week brought new challenges. Denise proposed a strategy during a team meeting that would streamline their client onboarding process. It was a solid idea backed by research and data. She had spent hours putting together the presentation. Victor sat through the entire thing without saying a word. He did not ask questions. He did not offer feedback. He simply watched with that unreadable expression on his face. 3 days later, Denise walked into the executive conference room and found Victor presenting her exact strategy to the senior leadership team. He had changed a few words here and there, rearranged some slides, but it was unmistakably her work. He presented it as his own original idea. Denise stood in the doorway, frozen. Richard Whitmore, 3, nodded approvingly. "Excellent work, Victor. This is exactly the kind of forward thinking we need." Victor smiled and accepted the praise. He never once looked in Denise's direction. After the meeting, Denise approached Victor in the hallway. "That was my proposal," she said, keeping her voice low and controlled. "You took my work and presented it as your own." Victor stopped walking and turned to face her. He was several inches taller, and he used his height to look down at her with obvious disdain. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "I've been developing that strategy for months. If your idea happened to be similar, that's just a coincidence. Great minds think alike, right?" He patted her on the shoulder like she was a child who needed comforting. "Don't worry," he added. "I'm sure you'll come up with something original eventually. Just give it time." Then he walked away, leaving Denise standing alone in the empty hallway. That night, Denise did not write in her journal. She sat in her apartment and stared at the wall for a long time. She thought about quitting. She thought about walking away from this job and finding somewhere else where she would be valued, where she would not have to fight for basic respect every single day. But then she thought about all the people who were watching her. The young black women in the office who looked at her with hope in their eyes. The colleagues who had whispered their support but were too afraid to speak up publicly. The little girl she used to be, who had been told to dream smaller. If she walked away now, what message would that send? Denise made a decision that night. She was not going to quit. She was not going to let Victor Brennan drive her out of a position she had earned. She was going to stay, and she was going to win, but she was also going to be smart about it. The next morning, Denise arrived at the office earlier than usual. She started CCing herself on every important email, creating a paper trail that could not be disputed. She began requesting written confirmation for meeting times and project assignments. She made sure that her ideas were documented and dated before she shared them with anyone. Some of her colleagues noticed the change. A woman named Patricia from the finance department pulled Denise aside one afternoon. "I see what's happening," Patricia said quietly. "I've worked here for 15 years. Victor has done this before. He targets anyone he sees as a threat." Denise studied Patricia's face. "Why doesn't anyone stop him?" Patricia sighed. "Because he's been here forever. He knows everyone. He plays golf with half the board members. People are afraid of crossing him. Were there others? Before me?" Patricia nodded slowly. "A few. They all eventually left. Some got pushed out. Others just couldn't take it anymore and resigned." She paused. "I thought you should know what you're up against." Denise thanked her for the warning. It was not exactly encouraging news, but at least now she understood the full picture. Victor was not just targeting her because of the promotion. This was a pattern. This was who he was. The harassment continued over the following weeks. Victor would make small comments during meetings that seemed innocent on the surface but carried a sharp edge underneath. He would question Denise's decisions in front of clients, undermining her authority at every opportunity. He would laugh just a little too loudly at jokes that were not funny, creating an atmosphere of tension and discomfort. The worst part was that most people pretended not to notice. They kept their heads down and focused on their own work. Nobody wanted to get involved. Nobody wanted to become Victor's next target. One afternoon, Denise was alone in the break room, pouring herself a cup of coffee. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Victor standing in the doorway. He closed the door behind him. "Can I give you some advice?" he asked. His voice was soft now, almost friendly. But his eyes were cold. Denise set down her coffee cup. "I'm listening." Victor stepped closer. "You don't belong here. Everyone knows it. You're a diversity hire, nothing more. The company needed to check a box and you were convenient." He tilted his head, studying her like she was something unpleasant he had found on the bottom of his shoe. "Why don't you make this easier on everyone and resign? Save yourself the embarrassment." Denise felt her heart pounding. Her hands wanted to shake, but she refused to let them. She looked Victor directly in the eyes and held his gaze without flinching. "I appreciate your concern," she said, her voice calm and steady. "But I earned this position. I earned every single thing I have. And I am not going anywhere." Victor's jaw tightened. He had expected her to crumble. She had not. "We'll see about that," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked out of the break room. Leaving Denise alone with her cold coffee and the heavy silence of an empty room, she knew now that this was more than just office politics. Victor wanted her gone, and he would do whatever it took to make that happen. But Denise had survived worse than Victor Brennan, and she was just getting started. Victor Brennan was not a patient man, but he knew how to wait when it mattered. He had spent 23 years at Whitmore and Associates, watching people come and go, learning how the game was played. He understood that the best way to destroy someone was not through a single dramatic blow. It was through a careful, methodical process that left no fingerprints. But Denise Carter was proving to be more stubborn than he expected. After their conversation in the break room, Victor had assumed she would start looking for another job. That was what the others had done. A few weeks of pressure, some strategic embarrassment, and they would quietly submit their resignations. Problem solved. No mess, no drama. Denise was different. She showed up every morning with the same calm confidence. She continued to lead meetings, build relationships with clients, and earn the respect of her team. Worse, some people were starting to notice her talent. Richard Whitmore himself had mentioned during a board meeting that he was impressed with her work. This could not continue. Victor decided it was time to accelerate his plan. The Henderson account was the largest client relationship at Whitmore and Associates. It was worth $14 million annually and had been with the company for over a decade. Losing Henderson would be catastrophic. Everyone knew this. Victor also knew that Denise had been assigned to lead the upcoming Henderson Quarterly Review. It was her chance to prove herself on the biggest stage. If she succeeded, her position would be secure. The executives would see her value, and Victor's influence would diminish. He could not allow that to happen. The first step was simple. Victor had lunch with Franklin Henderson, the CEO of Henderson Industries, at their usual restaurant downtown. They had known each other for years. Their wives played tennis together. Their children had attended the same private school. "I have to be honest with you, Frank," Victor said, leaning across the table with a concerned expression. "I'm worried about this new director they've brought in. Between us, I don't think she's ready for an account of your size and importance." Franklin frowned. "Really?" Richard seemed confident in her abilities. "Richard is a good man, but he's under pressure from the board to diversify leadership. You understand how these things work." Victor shook his head sadly. "I just don't want to see your account suffer because of internal politics." Franklin considered this. "What do you suggest?" "Let me be your point of contact for the quarterly review. Unofficially, of course. I'll make sure everything runs smoothly. And if this new director makes any mistakes, well, you'll have me there to catch them." Franklin nodded slowly. "I appreciate you looking out for us, Victor. That's what friends are for." The second step required more finesse. Victor needed to ensure that Denise would fail spectacularly during the presentation. He needed her to look incompetent in front of the most important client the company had. He started by feeding her incorrect information. Denise had requested the latest financial reports for Henderson Industries so she could prepare her analysis. Victor volunteered to gather the documents from the archives. What he gave her was a mix of outdated figures and deliberately altered projections. The numbers looked legitimate at first glance, but anyone who knew the account well would immediately spot the errors. Next, Victor changed the meeting time. The original appointment was scheduled for 2 o'clock on Thursday afternoon. Victor contacted Franklin's assistant directly and moved it to 1:30, claiming there had been a scheduling conflict. He made sure this change was never communicated to Denise as finally, Victor prepared his own presentation. A backup plan, he would call it. Something he had put together just in case the new director ran into trouble. He would position himself as the hero who saved the day, the experienced professional who stepped in when leadership failed. It was perfect. The night before the presentation, Denise sat in her apartment reviewing her materials for the 100th time. Something felt wrong, but she could not pinpoint what it was. The numbers seemed solid. Her strategy was sound. She had rehearsed her talking points until she could deliver them in her sleep. But there was a nagging feeling in the back of her mind. That would not go away. She thought about calling Patricia from finance to double-check some figures, but it was already past 10 o'clock. She did not want to bother anyone so late. Instead, Denise did something she had learned to do whenever she faced uncertainty. She trusted her instincts. She opened her laptop and began researching Henderson Industries independently. She pulled their public financial statements from online databases. She read recent news articles about the company. She cross-referenced everything against the reports Victor had provided. That was when she found the discrepancies. The revenue figures Victor had given her were from 2 years ago. The market projections were completely fabricated. The client satisfaction data did not match any publicly available information. Denise felt her stomach drop. She checked the clock. It was almost midnight. The presentation was in less than 14 hours. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her. She had built her entire presentation around false information. If she walked into that meeting and delivered these numbers, she would look like a fool. Her credibility would be destroyed. Everything she had worked for would be gone. Then the panic faded, and clarity took its place. This was not an accident. Someone had deliberately sabotaged her. Denise did not need to guess who. She could have called Richard Whitmore right then. She could have reported what she had discovered and demanded an investigation. But she knew how that would look. The new director, barely 2 months into the job, accusing a 20-year veteran of sabotage with nothing but circumstantial evidence. Victor would deny everything. He would claim she was making excuses for her own incompetence. It would become her word against his. And Denise knew. Whose word carried more weight in that building. No, she needed to handle this differently. She needed to beat Victor at his own game. Denise worked through the night. She pulled accurate data from every source she could find. She rebuilt her presentation from scratch, using verified numbers and legitimate projections. She created charts, graphs, and analysis that were bulletproof. By the time the sun came up, she had an entirely new presentation saved on her personal laptop. She also had a backup plan of her own throughout her weeks of documentation. Denise had compiled a detailed record of every incident involving Victor. The missed meeting invites, the stolen proposal, the break room confrontation, every email she should have received but did not, every attempt to undermine her authority. She organized everything into a clear, chronological file. Then she made 3 copies. One she emailed to herself, one she saved to a secure cloud storage account, and one she loaded onto a USB drive that she tucked into her jacket pocket. If Victor wanted a fight, she was going to give him one. At 12:45 on Thursday afternoon, Denise arrived at the office and headed straight for the conference room. She wanted to set up early, make sure everything was ready. The room was already full. Denise stopped in the doorway, confused. Franklin Henderson sat at the head of the table with several members of his executive team. Victor sat beside him, a stack of presentation materials spread out in front of him. Half a dozen Whitmore and Associates employees filled the remaining seats. They all turned to look at her. Victor smiled. "Denise," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "You're late. The meeting was moved to 1:30. Did you not get the memo?" Denise looked around the room. Every face held a different expression. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked curious. Franklin Henderson looked skeptical, like he was already forming a negative opinion. "I've already briefed Mr. Henderson on some concerns about your proposal," Victor continued. "But please don't let us stop you. I'm sure you have something prepared." He gestured toward the front of the room like a king granting permission to a servant. Denise stood frozen in the doorway. The trap had been sprung. Victor had orchestrated everything perfectly. She was supposed to crumble now. She was supposed to stammer and apologize and prove that she did not belong, but Denise Carter had not spent the night rebuilding her entire presentation for nothing. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked into the room. It was time to show everyone exactly who they were dealing with. The conference room felt smaller than usual. Maybe it was the number of people crowded around the table. Maybe it was the weight of expectation hanging in the air. Or maybe it was just the way Victor was looking at her, like a cat watching a mouse walk into a trap. Denise closed the door behind her and walked toward the front of the room. She could feel every eye following her movement. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the silence. Franklin Henderson cleared his throat. "Miss Carter, Victor has shared some concerns about the accuracy of your financial analysis. He suggested there might be some significant errors in the data you've prepared." Denise glanced at Victor. He was leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, that familiar smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He thought he had already won. He thought this was over. He was wrong. "Thank you for your patience, Mr. Henderson," Denise said calmly. "And I apologize for any confusion about the meeting time. There seems to have been a miscommunication." She did not look at Victor when she said this. She did not need to. "If you'll allow me a few minutes, I'd like to present my analysis. After that, you can decide for yourself whether there are any errors." Franklin exchanged a look with his team. Then he nodded. "Go ahead." Denise reached into her bag and pulled out her personal laptop. She had anticipated that the company computer might be compromised, so she had transferred everything to her own device. She connected it to the projector and waited for the screen to flicker to life. Victor shifted in his seat. This was not part of his plan. He had expected her to use the company laptop, the one loaded with the false data he had provided. The first slide appeared on the screen. It was not the presentation Victor had sabotaged. It was something entirely new. "Mr. Henderson," Denise began, "I want to start by thanking you for your continued partnership with Whitmore and Associates. Henderson Industries has been one of our most valued clients for over a decade, and it's my privilege to serve as your primary contact moving forward." She clicked to the next slide. A detailed breakdown of Henderson's current financial position appeared, with accurate figures pulled directly from public filings and verified internal reports. "Over the past month, I've conducted a comprehensive review of your account. I've identified several areas where we can improve efficiency, reduce costs, and strengthen our collaborative relationship." Franklin leaned forward, his skepticism slowly giving way to interest. Denise continued. She walked through her analysis with precision and confidence. She presented data that was accurate, projections that were realistic, and recommendations that were thoughtful and well-researched. She answered questions before they were asked. She anticipated concerns and addressed them directly. With every slide, Victor's expression grew darker. This was not supposed to happen. She was supposed to stumble. She was supposed to present the wrong numbers and look foolish. He had planned everything so carefully. 15 minutes into the presentation, Denise paused. "Now," she said, "I understand there were some concerns raised about errors in my data. I'd like to address that directly." She clicked to a new slide. It showed 2 columns side by side. On the left were the figures from the documents Victor had provided. On the right were the actual figures from verified sources. The data on the left is what was given to me for this presentation. As you can see, the revenue figures are from 2 years ago. The market projections don't match any current industry analysis, and the client satisfaction metrics appear to have been fabricated entirely. The room went very still. Denise turned to face Victor directly for the first time. "Fortunately, I always verify my sources independently. The data on the right represents the actual current state of Henderson Industries. These are the numbers I've based my analysis on today." Franklin Henderson's face had gone hard. He was a businessman who had built his company from nothing. He did not appreciate being manipulated. "Victor," he said slowly, "you told me this morning that Ms. Carter's analysis was full of errors. That doesn't appear to be the case." Victor's mouth opened and closed. For the first time since Denise had known him, he seemed at a loss for words. "There must be some misunderstanding," he managed. "The documents I provided came directly from our archives. If there were errors, it was an honest mistake." Denise reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the USB drive. "I have additional documentation I'd like to share," she said. "Over the past 2 months, I've experienced a pattern of behavior that I believe is relevant to today's discussion." She plugged the USB into her laptop and opened a file. "On September 15th, I was excluded from a client meeting that was rescheduled without my knowledge. On September 22nd, a proposal I developed was presented by another employee as their own original work. On October 3rd, I was told directly that I was a diversity hire who should resign for the good of the company." She clicked through documents as she spoke. Screenshots of missing emails, calendar records showing changed meeting times, a written timeline of every incident with dates and witnesses noted. "I submitted copies of this documentation to HR, the legal department, and the executive board this morning," Denise said. "I believe there has been a systematic effort to undermine my position and force me out of this company." The silence in the room was deafening. Richard Whitmore III, who had been sitting quietly in the corner observing, stood up. "Victor," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger, "is there any truth to these allegations?" Victor's face had gone pale. Sweat was visible on his forehead. He looked around the room for support, for someone to defend him, but every face was turned away. "This is ridiculous," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "She's making this up. She's trying to deflect from her own incompetence." "The documentation speaks for itself," Denise said calmly. "I'm not making accusations without evidence. Every claim I've made is supported by written records." Franklin Henderson pushed back his chair and stood up. "I've seen enough," he said. He turned to Richard Whitmore. Richard, I've done business with your company for 12 years. In all that time, I've never witnessed anything like this. He looked at Denise with new respect in his eyes. Miss Carter, your presentation today was excellent. Your analysis was thorough, your recommendations were sound, and your professionalism under pressure was impressive. He paused. I want you to remain as our primary contact. And I want assurance from Whitmore and Associates that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated. Richard nodded grimly. You have my word, Frank. Victor stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You can't be serious, he said. I've given 23 years to this company. 23 years. And you're going to take her side based on some manufactured documents? Nobody responded. Victor looked around the room one last time. He was searching for an ally, for anyone who would stand with him. He found nothing but silence and averted gazes. This isn't over, he said quietly. Then he walked out of the conference room. Slamming the door behind him, the tension in the room slowly began to dissolve. People shifted in their seats. Someone coughed nervously. Denise remained standing at the front of the room, her laptop still connected to the projector, her documentation still displayed on the screen. Franklin Henderson approached her and extended his hand. That took courage, he said. A lot of people would have just walked away rather than fight like that. Denise shook his hand firmly. Walking away was never an option for me. Mr. Henderson, I've worked too hard to let anyone take what I've earned. Franklin smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had seen from him. I believe you, he said. And I think we're going to work very well together. After the meeting ended and the room emptied, Denise stood alone by the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Her hands were trembling. The adrenaline that had carried her through the past hour was finally beginning to fade, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. But underneath the exhaustion was something else. Pride. She had faced down a man who wanted to destroy her career, and she had won, not through anger, not through revenge, but through preparation, documentation, and the simple refusal to be broken. Denise allowed herself one small smile. This was not the end. She knew that. There would be investigations, interviews, difficult conversations ahead, but for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe again. The days that followed the Henderson meeting were some of the longest of Denise's life. The office felt different now, quieter. People spoke in hushed voices when she walked past. Some avoided eye contact entirely. Others offered small nods of acknowledgement, silent gestures of support they had been too afraid to show before. Victor did not return to work the next day, or the day after that. On Friday morning, Richard Whitmore called Denise into his office. The CEO's office was on the top floor of the building, with windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. Richard sat behind a massive oak desk that had belonged to his father and his grandfather before him. 3 generations of Whitmores had built this company. The weight of that legacy was visible in everything from the antique furniture to the framed photographs on the walls. Richard gestured for Denise to sit down. I owe you an apology, he said. Denise had not expected that. She remained silent and let him continue. I've been reviewing the documentation you submitted. I've also spoken with HR and several employees who came forward after the Henderson meeting. Richard paused and rubbed his temples like a man carrying a heavy burden. It's clear that Victor's behavior toward you was not an isolated incident. There were complaints in the past, concerns raised by other employees over the years. We should have addressed this a long time ago. Denise nodded slowly. Patricia mentioned that others had left because of him. 3, Richard said quietly. 3 talented people who could have contributed so much to this company. We lost them because we failed to act. He met her eyes directly. I failed to act, and I'm sorry. It was a rare thing to hear a man in Richard Whitmore's position admit fault so openly. Denise appreciated the honesty. What happens now? She asked. Victor has been terminated, effective immediately. He's been asked to clear out his office and surrender his credentials. Legal is reviewing whether any of his actions warrant further consequences. Richard leaned forward. But that's not enough. We need to make sure this never happens again. He slid a folder across the desk toward her. I'd like you to help lead a new initiative. A comprehensive review of our workplace policies, our reporting procedures, our company culture. I want you to help us build something better. Denise opened the folder and scanned the contents. It was a proposal for a diversity and inclusion task force with her name listed as co-chair. You want me to fix what's broken, she said. I want you to help us understand what's broken in the first place. You've seen things from a perspective that most of us in leadership have never had to consider. Your insight is valuable. Richard paused. This isn't about optics or checking boxes. I genuinely want to do better. Will you help? Denise looked at the proposal for a long moment. Part of her wanted to say no. Part of her wanted to point out that it should not take a public crisis for a company to examine its own failures. Part of her was simply tired, but another part of her thought about the young black women in the office who had looked at her with hope. She thought about Patricia, who had worked here for 15 years watching people like Victor go unchallenged. She thought about the 3 employees who had been driven out before her. If she could help change things, even a little, wasn't that worth the effort? I'll do it, she said. But I have conditions. Richard raised an eyebrow. Name them. This can't be a symbolic gesture. If we're going to make changes, they have to be real, meaningful. I want resources, I want authority, and I want the board's commitment to follow through. Richard nodded. Done, and I want a seat at the table. Not just for this initiative, but permanently. If leadership is going to make decisions that affect everyone in this company, there should be voices in the room that represent everyone. Richard considered this. Then he smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. The board has already discussed it. We'd like to offer you a position as Vice President of Client Relations. It comes with a seat on the executive committee. Denise felt her breath catch. Vice President. A seat on the executive committee. This was beyond anything she had imagined when she accepted the regional director position just 3 months ago. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Richard replied. You've more than earned it. The following Monday, the company held an all-hands meeting in the main auditorium. Every employee gathered to hear Richard Whitmore address what had happened. He did not minimize or deflect. He acknowledged the failures directly and outlined the steps the company would take to ensure accountability and change. Then, he introduced Denise as the new vice president of client relations. The applause started slowly, then built into something bigger. People rose from their seats. The standing ovation lasted for nearly a full minute. Denise stood at the podium and looked out at the faces before her. She saw colleagues who had watched silently while she struggled. She saw others who had offered quiet support when they could. She saw young employees who were just starting their careers, full of hope and uncertainty about what the future might hold. She thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The little girl in Detroit who had been told to dream smaller. The long nights of studying and sacrifice. The rejection letters and closed doors. The break room where Victor had tried to convince her she did not belong. All of it had led here. Thank you, Denise began, her voice steady and clear. I'm honored to stand before you today. But I want to be honest about something. This journey was not easy. There were moments when I wanted to give up. Moments when I questioned whether any of this was worth the fight. The room was completely silent. But I kept going. Not because I'm special. Not because I'm stronger than anyone else. I kept going because I knew my worth. I knew what I had worked for. And I refused to let anyone else define my value. She paused and let the words settle. I didn't fight back for revenge. I fought back because I believe that everyone in this room deserves to work in a place where they are respected, where their contributions are valued, where they don't have to prove their right to exist every single day. Denise looked at the young faces in the crowd, the ones who reminded her of herself at that age. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Your response to adversity defines you. When someone tries to make you feel small, you have a choice. You can shrink to fit their expectations, Or you can stand tall and show them exactly who you are. She smiled. Don't let anyone else write your story. That pen belongs to you. The applause that followed was thunderous after the meeting. Denise was surrounded by colleagues wanting to shake her hand, to congratulate her, to share their own stories of struggles they had faced. Patricia from finance hugged her tightly and whispered thank you through tears. Later that evening, Denise sat alone in her new office on the executive floor. It was larger than her previous one, with an even better view of the city. The sun was setting, painting the Chicago skyline in shades of orange and gold. She thought about calling her mother to share the news. She thought about the long road that still lay ahead, the work that needed to be done, the changes that would take time to implement. But for now, in this quiet moment, she allowed herself to simply feel proud. Denise Carter had been underestimated. She had been dismissed, sabotaged, and told she did not belong. But she had answered every challenge, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with excellence, and she had won. Not just for herself, but for everyone who would come after her. Everyone who would walk through those doors and see a black woman in the executive suite and know that it was possible, that was the real victory. Denise smiled, picked up her phone, and dialed her mother's number. Hey, Mama, she said when the call connected. I have some news. Outside the window, the city lights began to flicker on, one by one, like 1,000 small promises in the darkness. And for the first time in a very long time, Denise Carter felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be.